Part 1. The silence after the waves. I still remember the sound of the ocean the morning after the funeral. It wasn't peaceful the way it used to be. It felt louder, heavier, like the waves were trying to remind me of everything that was gone. I lived only 2 blocks from the shore, but for months I couldn't make myself walk there. The sea had always been our place, mine and Emily's. She used to call it her moving painting. We'd sit on the sand in silence, watching the water change colors, sometimes deep blue, sometimes gray, depending on her mood, she said. Now it was just gray, no matter the weather. After she died, the house became a museum. Her books stayed on the shelf in the exact order she left them. Her mug, chipped at the rim, sat near the sink for weeks until I finally washed it, feeling like I'd erased something sacred. People told me time would heal, but time didn't even move. Days folded into each other, and the world outside just blurred. I stopped going to work for a while. My boss, kind enough, told me to take as much time as I needed. That's what people say when they have no idea how long grief lasts. I didn't either. At night, I'd sit on the porch and listen to the sea wind. Sometimes I'd imagine hearing her laughter carried in it. Sometimes I'd talk back. I never said her name aloud. It hurt too much to give sound to the absence. The first sign of change came the day I realized the plants she used to care for were dying. They were in the sunroom, the only bright place in the house. I hadn't watered them in months. When I noticed the yellow leaves, it hit me. Life had continued all around me, but I'd refused to join it. Something about that felt wrong, even disloyal to her memory. Emily loved living things. I watered every pot that day, talking to each plant like she did. That was the first day I did something that wasn't about missing her. Weeks passed. The air turned warmer. Tourists began to return to town, and I couldn't avoid the ocean anymore. The noise of people laughing, kids running with dripping ice cream cones, seagulls fighting over crumbs, it all dragged me back outside. I started walking the beach late in the evenings, when it was nearly empty. That's when I first saw her. She was sitting by the rocks, sketchbook in her lap, the kind of quiet presence that didn't disturb the air around her. I didn't mean to stare, but something about the way she looked at the water, focused yet distant, felt familiar. I walked past, pretending to check the tide line. A few nights later, she was there again. Same spot. The third night, too. I don't know why I started expecting her, but I did. The fourth time, she noticed me. "Do you always walk this late?" she asked. Her voice was calm, slightly husky, like someone who didn't talk much, but meant it when she did. "Yeah," I said. "Helps me sleep." She smiled slightly. "Same." We didn't say more. Just stood there, both watching the same restless water. I remember thinking how strange it was that silence could feel shared. After that, it became routine, not planned, just something that happened. I'd walk. She'd draw. Sometimes we'd nod to each other. Words didn't seem necessary. One night, she asked if I wanted to see her sketches. She turned the pages, charcoal drawings of waves, shells, driftwood, a lighthouse in the distance. Then one page stopped me. It was the outline of a man standing alone by the shore. "That's me," I said before I could stop myself. She nodded. "Yeah, you look like you belong there." I didn't know whether to laugh or feel exposed. "Not sure that's a compliment." "It is," she said softly. "People who belong to the sea usually carry stories." That line stayed with me. Emily used to say something similar. The ocean keeps secrets, but it also listens. Her name, the artist's, was Claire. She had moved to town a few months ago from Portland, she said, chasing quiet. She rented a small attic above the bakery on Harbor Street, spent most days sketching or walking with her old camera. She wasn't much older than me, maybe 30. I didn't tell her about Emily, not then. I barely told anyone anymore. But there was something about Claire's stillness that didn't demand explanations. Sometimes we'd talk about meaningless things, the weather, the strange way fog moved over the dunes, the sound of boats at night. But inside those small exchanges, something delicate began to move. Not quite hope, but not despair either. One evening, I caught myself laughing. Just a small, honest laugh at something she said about a seagull stealing her pencil. The sound startled me. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd heard it. That night, I went home and, for the first time, didn't cry before bed. Part 2. The Edge of Remembering. Spring slid into summer almost unnoticed. The days grew longer, the light softer. The air smelled of salt and blooming grass. I started measuring time not by weeks, but by how many evenings I met Claire by the water. I never planned it. It just happened that when I felt the pull of the tide, she was already there. We rarely touched on personal things. It was like walking beside someone through fog. You see their outline, but not their face. Yet that distance felt safe. I wasn't ready for closeness. She didn't seem to need it. One evening she asked, "Do you ever draw?" "Not really." "You should try," she said, flipping to a blank page and handing me the charcoal. I hesitated. "What if I ruin it?" She shrugged. "Then it's yours." I drew a crooked horizon and laughed at how bad it was. She smiled. "Now it's real," she said. "Perfect lines don't feel alive." That night, after she left, I walked home slower than usual. The streetlights reflected on wet pavement, and I realized I hadn't thought of Emily for an hour. The realization scared me, like betrayal. I sat on the porch until dawn, fighting guilt that made no sense. Loving someone new didn't erase the dead, but grief twists logic until even breathing feels like disloyalty. A few days later, I brought Claire coffee from the little shop near the marina. She thanked me like it was a rare gift. We sat watching the sea swallow the sun. I finally said her name aloud, just to feel it settle into the air. "Claire." She looked up. "I lost someone," I said. My voice sounded strange. "A long time ago." She didn't ask who. She just nodded. I figured. Silence stretched between us, gentle, not heavy. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes we survive by talking to ghosts until they fade enough to let the living in." I didn't reply. The wind carried her words out to the water. Something inside me cracked, not painfully, more like ice melting. From then on, I spoke more. About small things at first. The recipes Emily used, how she hated mornings, how she'd name every stray cat that crossed our street. Claire listened without pity. When I ran out of words, she'd just draw. One afternoon, a storm rolled in early. We took shelter under the boardwalk, watching sheets of rain erase the horizon. The noise was deafening. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. She laughed when lightning lit the sky. "Feels like the world's washing itself clean. Maybe it's trying to." She looked at me then, really looked. "You are too." The storm passed. She left her sketchbook open on the sand by mistake. I picked it up. Inside, between drawings of waves, there was one of me, sitting with my head down, rain around me. The caption read, "Man waiting for the tide to forgive him." I stared at it for a long time. Forgive him for what? For surviving? That night, I dreamed of Emily for the first time in months. She was standing by the shore, barefoot, smiling. She didn't say a word, just pointed toward the horizon where the light broke through clouds. When I woke, I wasn't crying. The sheets smelled of salt and sea breeze, as if the dream had been real. Over the next weeks, Claire and I grew into a rhythm. We didn't define it, didn't name it. She'd bring her sketches. I'd bring coffee, or sometimes nothing. She told me she once loved someone who left without goodbye. I didn't ask details. Pain recognizes its own kind. It doesn't need names. One late evening, we sat until the stars appeared. The sea was calm, a rare thing here. I said, "It feels different now." "What does?" "The silence." She tilted her head. "Maybe because it's not empty anymore." Her words hit deep. For the first time since Emily's death, I felt the world wasn't holding its breath. Part 3. The first morning without guilt. I woke before sunrise, which hadn't happened in years. For a moment, I didn't know why I was awake. Then I realized the heaviness that usually sat on my chest was missing. It wasn't gone forever, but it had stepped aside long enough for air to move. The first thing I saw through the open curtain was the horizon glowing pale orange over the sea. I made coffee, strong and bitter, and sat on the steps outside. The town was still asleep except for gulls and the sound of water hitting rocks. It felt like the world before it's been touched by people, raw and honest. For the first time, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what still existed. Around noon, I walked toward the market. Fishermen were unloading nets. The air smelled of salt and diesel. I hadn't been there since Emily died. Every face felt both new and familiar. A woman selling fruit waved. "Haven't seen you in a while." I smiled and said, "Yeah, been hiding." She handed me a peach. "Then welcome back." I carried that peach like a token. I didn't even eat it. It just felt like proof that life could acknowledge me again. That evening I met Claire near the dunes. She was barefoot, her sketchbook closed beside her. You look different, she said. Do I? Lighter, maybe. We walked along the wet sand. The tide was low, leaving mirrors of water where the sky reflected perfectly. I used to come here with someone, I said. It was our place. I know. You knew? She nodded. You look at the ocean like you're asking it to remember with you. I told her about Emily properly then. The way we met at a bookstore, the trips, the accident. I didn't plan to, it just spilled out. Claire listened quietly, eyes on the horizon. When I finished, she said, she sounds like she would have loved this view. She did. Then you're honoring her just by standing here. That simple statement undid something inside me. I realized grief had made me believe remembering and living were opposites. They weren't. They could coexist. Days blurred again, but this time differently, filled, not empty. I started working part-time at the small boat repair shop near the docks. I liked the routine, the smell of wood and salt, the way my hands ached at night. Claire sometimes stopped by with sandwiches. She'd sit on a crate, watching me tighten bolts. You look like you actually belong to the world again, she said once. Maybe I do. She laughed. That's progress. One weekend she suggested a drive inland. Just a few hours. I need to sketch the hills, she said. I hesitated, then agreed. The road wound through pine forests and small farms. The air changed, drier, full of grass instead of salt. We stopped by a lake. The silence there was different from the seas. It was still, not endless. We ate bread and fruit on the dock. I said, it's strange being somewhere the wind doesn't smell like her. Claire looked at me. And, it's okay. That admission felt like a door opening. The sun burned through clouds, turning the water silver. On the way back, she played an old folk song from her phone. The lyrics were about letting go, though not forgetting. I didn't know if she'd chosen it for me or herself. We didn't talk much after that. Words would have ruined the quiet. A week later, I found one of her sketches tucked under my door. A charcoal drawing of 2 chairs facing the sea, one empty, one occupied. On the back she'd written, sometimes love returns as listening. That night I dreamed again of Emily. She was sitting in the other chair, smiling faintly. When I woke, I didn't cry. I whispered, thank you, into the dark, unsure to whom it was meant. Part 4. The weight of small things. Life didn't change overnight. There were mornings when the bed felt impossibly empty, when the sound of coffee brewing in the kitchen reminded me of Emily more than it comforted me. Yet, the emptiness no longer ruled me. It had softened. I carried it like a small weight instead of a boulder. Claire's presence was subtle but constant. Sometimes she was with me, sometimes she wasn't. That was the beauty of it. I learned to enjoy her company without needing it like air. One morning, I found a stray dog by the pier. Small, scruffy, shaking with cold. I hesitated, thinking I couldn't care for anything living that much again. Then Claire appeared beside me. Go on, she said. You know you want to. I bent down. The dog whimpered and crawled into my lap. The warmth it offered was simple, honest. I didn't feel like I was betraying Emily. I felt like I was moving forward. Days turned into weeks. I walked the beach with the dog and Claire sometimes alone. I noticed details I'd missed before. The way light hit the wet sand in the early morning, the smell of salt mixed with pine from the distant woods, the sound of waves breaking gently against rocks. Life was in these details. Work helped too. I fixed boats that would never leave the dock, painted hulls in the sun, learned to greet people by name. There were moments of connection I hadn't experienced in years. A child waving as I carried a bucket of paint, an old fisherman nodding in recognition. It was ordinary, mundane, and somehow miraculous. Claire and I didn't speak much about the past. She never asked, and I never offered. But one night, sitting on the rocks after a storm, she said, "You're afraid, aren't you?" I laughed softly. Of what? Of letting go and losing again. I paused. She was right. I had been carrying the fear of loss like armor. It kept me from falling, but it also kept me frozen. I don't know if I can, I admitted. She looked at the waves. You already are. I didn't understand immediately. It wasn't until I watched the foam curl and break along the shore that I realized. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. Loving again doesn't erase what was lost. It's the willingness to carry memory alongside hope. Over the next few weeks, I began small gestures that had seemed impossible before. I cooked dinner for myself. I left notes for the dog. I drew in a notebook beside Claire's sketches. I laughed more than I had in 2 years. One evening, The town hosted a small festival by the harbor. Music, lanterns, laughter, reminders of life continuing beyond grief. Claire and I walked slowly among the crowd. I felt eyes on me, strangers smiling at our presence. I felt anchored. Later, she took my hand. Not a dramatic gesture, not a declaration, just a quiet acknowledgement. "I like this," she said softly. "Me too," I replied. That night, for the first time, I lay down without feeling the emptiness pressing on my chest. Sleep came naturally. I dreamed of Emily, yes, but differently, with warmth instead of pain. I dreamt of her smiling, of the ocean calm, of love returning not as a replacement, but as a continuation. Part 5. Trusting the Horizon. Summer reached its peak. Days were long, the air humid with salt and sun. The town pulsed quietly with life. Boats returning with catch, children shrieking along the piers, gulls wheeling overhead. I began waking earlier, walking the shoreline before the sun rose, Claire occasionally trailing behind me. Despite the peace, a subtle unease lingered. Some mornings, I would glance at the horizon and feel a sharp pull of anxiety. What if this happiness was temporary? What if I grew close to Claire only to lose her? Grief had taught me vigilance, and now it whispered lies, urging me to retreat. One evening, after a long day at the boat shop, I found Claire waiting for me on the pier. Her hair was damp from the tide, the last rays of sun catching the tips. She didn't speak at first. She just held out her hand. "I want you to come with me," she said softly. I hesitated. "Where?" "Out on the water. Just a little sail before sunset." No talk, no plans, just the horizon. The fear tugged at me, but I nodded. The boat creaked as we pushed off the dock, the smell of varnish and salt mingling in the air. Water lapped against the hull, soft and rhythmic. For a while, we didn't speak. I watched her sketch, pencil moving across paper, capturing the light on the waves. Eventually, she looked at me. "You're holding something back," she said. I swallowed hard. "I'm afraid," I admitted. "Afraid that if I let myself care, I'll lose it, and I'll lose you too." She didn't laugh, didn't try to persuade me. She reached across, brushed my hand with hers. "The horizon doesn't wait. You can't control it, only trust it." Her words sank deep. I realized she wasn't asking me to forget my past, only to let the future in. I exhaled slowly, feeling tension I didn't know I carried dissolve. That night, the sky bled orange and violet. I let the sail drift, letting wind guide us, letting the water remind me that control is often an illusion. I thought of Emily, of her laughter, of the life we shared, and I let myself think of Claire without guilt. For the first time, hope and memory coexisted naturally. Returning to shore, I felt lighter. Small gestures became easier, reaching for her hand, smiling at her sketches, sharing quiet jokes. Life didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like living. A week later, I took a risk. I invited Claire inside my home for dinner. Not as a guest, not as a visitor, as someone whose presence mattered. I cooked, clumsy but earnest. She tasted everything, nodded approvingly, laughed at my attempts to plate the fish attractively. After dinner, we sat on the porch, overlooking the water. I realized I hadn't thought of grief all evening. It was still there, a shadow at the edges of my awareness, but it no longer consumed me. "You're different," she said. "I can see it." "I feel different," I admitted, like I'm finally breathing again. She leaned against me. "Good. You deserve it." The dog, who had become a silent witness to all these moments, curled at our feet. Waves lapped softly, carrying away years of fear and doubt. The horizon stretched endlessly, inviting trust. For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed in the possibility of a new beginning. Not a replacement of what I lost, but an addition to life, a continuation of love in a different form. And in that simple moment, sitting on the porch with Claire and the dog, feeling the salt breeze on my face, hearing the sea, I understood. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant honoring the past while daring to hope again. Part 6. The first goodbye that wasn't final. Autumn approached slowly, painting the town in shades of amber and rust. Mornings grew cooler, and fog rolled in from the ocean like slow, deliberate fingers. Life had settled into rhythm, but rhythm always carries the possibility of disruption. One evening, Claire received a call. She didn't answer immediately, only frowned and pulled her jacket tighter around her. The way she held the phone, body tense, lips pressed, reminded me of grief itself, that rigid, immovable weight I had once carried. "Everything okay?" I asked. She shook her head. "It's complicated. I wanted to press, but I didn't." I had learned patience. She was her own story, as I was mine. The next day, she left early, claiming she needed to sort things out. She didn't say goodbye, didn't promise to be back soon. The empty space she left was immediate, palpable, like a sudden storm at sea. My chest tightened, old habits rising, fear, guilt, panic. I spent the day walking the shoreline, letting waves absorb my anxiety. I thought of Emily briefly, a memory that once would have consumed me. But this time, I recognized the difference. The past was a guide, not a jailer. Still, the absence of Claire was sharp. That evening, I returned home to find a sketchbook on my porch. I opened it cautiously. The first page was blank, the next filled with delicate lines forming a lighthouse at dusk. A note tucked inside read, "I had to face something. I'm still me, still here. Trust the horizon." I exhaled, feeling a tremor of relief. Trust. The word resonated. I realized that letting go of fear, letting someone in fully, meant embracing uncertainty. Love always carries risk, even after loss. A few days later, she returned. She didn't rush into my arms, didn't over-explain. She simply smiled, eyes tired but steady, and held out her hand. "Come with me," she said. We walked along the pier in silence. She finally explained. A family emergency, distant and pressing. She had needed space, clarity. Listening, I felt pride more than fear. She hadn't abandoned me. She had confronted reality and returned. That night, we sat by the fire pit behind my house, sharing warmth in the cooling air. I realized how little words were necessary. Presence, steadiness, trust. These were the languages we had learned. The dog lay between us, the flames flickering across our faces. I held Claire's hand, the moment quiet but full. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't afraid. I was simply alive, and I recognized the gift in that. Part 7. The horizon opens. Winter had yet to arrive, but the air carried its edge. The mornings were crisp, the fog heavier, and the sound of the ocean sharper, more insistent. I woke earlier, like I had throughout the year, but now my wakefulness carried anticipation, not dread. Claire had become part of the rhythm of my days, not just a presence on the shore, but a companion in the quiet moments that once belonged solely to grief. We started planning small excursions, tiny adventures to explore the town and its surroundings. One morning, we hiked up the ridge overlooking the harbor. The ocean spread below, a vast mirror of sky and possibilities. Claire stopped mid-step, sketchbook in hand, and traced the horizon with her pencil. "Do you see it?" she asked. I looked and nodded. "Yeah, it's endless." "Exactly. Endless," she repeated. "That's the point. The past doesn't vanish. It just becomes part of the view." Her words lodged in my chest. I realized I had been holding onto my grief as though it were a tether, when in truth it could be a lens, one that allowed me to see the beauty in the present. I felt a subtle stirring, something I hadn't felt in years, courage. Back home, we made tea and sat by the living room window, looking out at the sea. I watched her draw, the lines confident, fluid. I wondered if she realized how much her presence had shifted the way I perceived the world. She had restored my capacity to feel, to hope, to breathe fully without apology. "I want to try something," I said quietly. She looked up, eyebrow raised. "I want to be fully present. Not just here, but here with you. Without fear." Her lips curved into a smile, soft and approving. "Then do it." I reached for her hand. The warmth that spread through me was not frantic, not desperate. It was calm, deliberate, a choice, not a necessity. The kind of love I had feared since Emily's death. The next weeks were filled with subtle declarations, cooking together, sharing stories, laughter echoing along the empty streets, small touches that were not urgent, but meaningful. Each gesture layered trust upon trust, creating a foundation that felt unbreakable. One evening, as the sun dipped behind clouds, painting the ocean in shades of gold and violet, Claire said, "We should mark this." "Mark what?" I asked. This moment. The fact that we're here, together, choosing presence over fear." We walked to the pier, sketchbooks in hand, and drew the same scene. Two figures watching the horizon, not touching, not entwined, but undeniably together. The act felt ceremonial, a silent acknowledgement that love could exist again, delicate yet unwavering. As the months passed, the rhythm of the town mirrored the rhythm in my heart. I no longer counted days in loss. I counted them in moments of quiet joy. The small things, the smell of rain on sand, the warmth of a shared scarf, the dog curling at our feet, became the markers of a life rebuilt. One night, sitting on the porch, watching the stars reflect in the restless water, I realized something profound. Loving again had not diminished my past, it had enriched it. Emily's memory remained, a soft echo in my chest, but it no longer dictated my capacity for happiness. Claire had shown me that grief and love could coexist, like waves that rise and fall but never cease. Part 8. The first winter together. Winter arrived slowly, quietly, the town transforming into a palette of grays and muted whites. The sea's roar was harsher, sharper, and the wind cut across the pier like a cold reminder of the months that had passed. Yet, for the first time, winter didn't feel like an enemy. It was simply another season, another frame in the life I was rebuilding. Claire and I adapted. Our routines shifted to shorter walks, more time indoors, quiet mornings over tea and sketching. The dog slept at our feet, occasionally lifting its head to sniff at the scent of snow drifting in through the window. The house, once echoing with absence, was now filled with warmth, light, and small, deliberate laughter. One morning, a gentle snow began to fall. Claire and I ventured outside, boots crunching along the frost-covered sand. The horizon was veiled, the sun a muted orb behind layers of clouds. I reached for her hand instinctively, feeling the certainty in her grip. The air smelled of ice and salt, a sharpness that reminded me life was alive, raw and undeniable. I've never liked snow, I admitted quietly, watching flakes land on her hair. Neither did I, she said, smiling. But maybe that's because we never had someone to watch it with. It struck me, the simplicity of what she said. Happiness didn't have to be loud or grand. It could be the quiet acknowledgement of presence, the shared stillness against the chill. Days passed, each filled with small affirmations, cooking together, sketching side by side, sharing stories of our pasts without fear of judgment. I noticed how my laughter had returned fully, unrestrained, and how I had begun to anticipate her presence not with anxiety, but with a calm eagerness. One evening, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. We sat near the fireplace, sketchbooks abandoned, the dog nestled between us. Claire reached for my hand, her fingers intertwined with mine naturally, without hesitation. "You've changed," she said softly. "So have you," I replied. Her eyes reflected the firelight, and I saw in them what I had been afraid to recognize in myself: trust, hope, and the quiet strength to move forward. Winter also brought challenges, short bursts of doubt, moments where grief whispered in corners of my mind. On such nights, I would sit alone for a while, remembering Emily, acknowledging her place in my heart, then return to Claire and feel the warmth of someone who chose to be there, consistently and without condition. One morning, as the snow melted into slush along the pier, Claire suggested a small celebration. Our first winter together, not marked by holidays or gifts, but by acknowledgement of endurance and choice. We baked bread, simple and hearty, laughing at flour on our noses, the dog trying to eat scraps from the floor. We drank tea and shared warmth, recognizing the extraordinary in ordinary acts. It was in these small moments that I understood. Happiness, love, and memory could coexist. The past was not erased. It was honored, but it no longer imprisoned me. Each day was a testament to resilience, a quiet victory over fear. By the end of winter, I felt fully present. The horizon outside my window no longer loomed as a symbol of uncertainty, but as an invitation. The sea whispered secrets I had once feared to hear, and I listened, open, steady, unafraid. Part 9. The Promise of Spring. Spring arrived slowly, brushing the town with soft greens and delicate blooms. The air smelled of wet earth and salt, a quiet promise of renewal. Days grew longer, and the sun cast gentle light over the harbor, reflecting off the rippling waves in patterns that reminded me of the first moments Claire and I had met on the shore. The arrival of spring carried a sense of possibility. For the first time in years, I noticed it not with fear, but with anticipation. Claire and I spent mornings walking along the pier, afternoons in the attic above the bakery where she worked, sketching, planning small trips, and evenings back at the house, sharing the quiet comfort of presence. One morning, we ventured to a meadow just outside town, where wildflowers were starting to bloom. The dog ran ahead, barking at birds and chasing shadows. Claire sketched the scene, her pencil moving quickly, capturing colors and shapes in a way that seemed effortless. I watched her, feeling a surge of gratitude and awe. "This place feels alive," I said, inhaling the sweet scent of blossoms. "Just like us," she replied softly, without looking up from her sketch. Her words struck me, not as a claim or declaration, but as a gentle recognition of how far we had come. We had survived grief, uncertainty, fear, and here we were, alive, choosing to exist fully in the present. That evening, back at the house, I suggested we plant a small garden. Nothing grand, just a few flowers and herbs, a testament to growth and care. Claire laughed, agreeing readily. As we dug, planted, and watered, the act itself became symbolic. Life required attention, patience, and trust, all the things I had learned to give again. Over the next few weeks, the town seemed to mirror our own transformation. The streets filled with tourists, laughter carried on the breeze, and the harbor sparkled under the warm sun. I noticed how naturally I smiled now, how easily I laughed, and how fear no longer clutched at the edges of my mind. One evening, sitting on the porch with Claire, watching the horizon fade into soft oranges and pinks, I realized I was ready. Ready to acknowledge that life could continue in fullness, that love could exist without diminishing the past. I'm ready," I said, fingers brushing hers. "To live fully, not just survive." She smiled, warmth radiating from her eyes. "You've been ready for a while. You just didn't know it yet." That night, as the stars emerged over the calm sea, we walked along the pier, hand in hand, without fear or hesitation. The horizon stretched endlessly before us, no longer a boundary, but an invitation. In that quiet certainty, I felt the culmination of all the months, all the moments of grief and hope, consolidation and fear, a new chapter. The dog trotted alongside, occasionally stopping to sniff at a driftwood branch, as if approving the journey. I laughed quietly, the sound unrestrained, full of life. Claire squeezed my hand, a small acknowledgement of shared understanding. For the first time, I allowed myself to envision the future, a life together, grounded in trust, memory, and choice. Emily's presence lingered, not as a shadow, but as a foundation, a reminder that love endures in many forms. The promise of spring was not just the season. It was the realization that hope could bloom again, that happiness could coexist with memory, that love, when chosen and nurtured, could thrive even after loss. Part 10. A Life Reclaimed. Summer returned, warmer and brighter than the previous year. The town had settled into its familiar rhythm, but now it felt alive with possibility instead of mere routine. The harbor bustled with boats, gulls wheeled overhead, and the scent of salt and fresh fish lingered in the air. But more than anything, I noticed the quiet, steady pulse of my own life, something I hadn't felt for years. Claire and I had established our routines, small and deliberate. Morning walks, sketching in the attic above the bakery, coffee on the porch, evenings watching the horizon bleed colors over the water. The dog, ever present, had grown into a constant companion, a reminder of trust, patience, and the joys of caring. One morning, as the sunlight streamed across the sand and painted the waves with gold, I realized that for the first time in years, I was fully present. No grief tugging, no guilt weighing. Just the moment, fully, honestly. We spent the day tending our small garden, laughing as dirt got under our nails, the dog running ahead. Claire leaned against me briefly, her head resting on my shoulder. "You've grown into this life so well," she said softly. I smiled. "I've grown because of you." It was a truth I had felt for months, a quiet acknowledgement of her influence, her patience, and her unwavering presence. She had taught me that love could be gentle, sustaining, and freeing, not just consuming. That evening, we walked the pier, hand in hand. The horizon stretched endlessly before us, a reminder of possibility. For years, I had feared the unknown, had clung to memory as though survival depended on it. Now, I embraced the horizon as an invitation, a space for love to grow again. We sat on the weathered boards, the dog curled at our feet. I felt a surge of gratitude for the small things, the smell of salt in the air, the brush of Claire's hand against mine, the quiet rhythm of waves breaking against the shore. Life had returned, not as a replacement of the past, but as a continuation. I thought of Emily, of the love we had shared, and I smiled. She was not gone from my heart. She had been a foundation, a teacher of resilience, grief, and depth. But she no longer dictated my capacity for happiness. I could remember without being consumed, love without fear, live without restraint. Claire looked at me, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "We're really here, aren't we?" "We are," I said, "and we'll keep being here." The dog lifted its head and gave a soft bark, as though agreeing. The sea whispered against the pier, carrying with it a quiet affirmation. The horizon remained infinite, promising more, days of warmth, nights of calm, laughter, and shared silences. That night, as the stars emerged and reflected in the calm water, I felt a completeness I had thought impossible. Life had returned, richer, textured, and alive. Love had returned, not as a shadow of loss, but as a living, breathing force. I held Claire's hand and knew, without hesitation, that the future was ours to shape. Together, we could honor the past, embrace the present, and step confidently into what lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, I didn't fear the horizon. I trusted it. I had reclaimed my life.